Welcome back to another video of Rugged West Stories. Tonight's tale takes us deep into the lonely heart of the frontier, where silence itself can drive a man mad. A poor rancher, living alone for years on the edge of Apache territory, thought his biggest enemy was hunger and isolation. But one stormy night, 10 Apache riders appeared at his gate, not with weapons drawn, but with desperate eyes, asking for shelter. What started as a simple act of humanity would drag this rancher into a battle of trust, survival, and betrayal. Stay with us. This story only grows darker from here. Samuel Hart hadn't spoken to another soul in nearly 3 years. His ranch sat in a forgotten patch of land, miles of dust, scrub, and silence in every direction. The house was small, the barn smaller, and the cattle fewer than he could count on one hand. But it was all his. The nights were the worst. The wind would howl through the cracks in the shutters, and Samuel would sit at his table, staring at the single flame of his lantern, sipping bitter coffee that tasted more like dust than drink. Sometimes he'd talk to himself. Sometimes he'd talk to his horse. Sometimes he'd just sit in silence until sleep took him. That night, the storm rolled in heavy. Thunder growled low, and rain hammered the roof until it felt like the sky itself might cave in. Samuel leaned back in his chair, boots on the table, hat pulled low. He'd just begun to doze when he heard it, a knock hard, sharp on his door. Samuel froze. No one came out this far. Not neighbors, not peddlers, and certainly not in weather like this. He reached for the rifle propped against the wall. Another knock. Louder this time. Slowly he rose and opened the door. What he saw made his blood run cold. 10 riders sat on horseback in the downpour, water dripping from their long black hair, feathers plastered to their shoulders. Faces painted, eyes burning in the dark, Apaches. For a moment Samuel's grip tightened on his rifle. He'd heard the stories, settlers killed in their sleep, cattle driven off, barns burned to ash. He thought this was the end of his lonely little ranch, but then the leader dismounted. A tall man with broad shoulders, his eyes hard but not cruel. He stepped into the lantern light and spoke in slow, broken English. Shelter. One night. No harm. Samuel blinked, rain dripping from his hat. You want to stay here? In my house? The man nodded once. Behind him, the other riders shifted restlessly, one clutching his side where blood stained his shirt. For a long moment, Samuel said nothing. His mind screamed no. This was madness. 10 Apaches under his roof meant 10 blades at his throat. But as his eyes swept over them, he saw more than warriors. He saw exhaustion. He saw wounds. He saw men on the edge of breaking. Samuel lowered his rifle just slightly. Bairn, he muttered. You can use the barn. The leader's jaw tightened as if pride fought against need. But finally he gave a single nod. With a sharp whistle, the men dismounted and began leading their horses toward the barn. Samuel followed, lantern in hand. Inside, the smell of hay and wet leather filled the air. The riders collapsed in the straw, some tearing into dried meat, others binding their wounds. Samuel stood by the door, rifle in hand, watching them like a hawk. Every movement made his heart race. 10 Apaches on his land, 10 strangers who could end his life before dawn. The leader approached him. He was older than the rest, scars across his cheek, eyes sharp as flint. He extended his hand. I am Katena, he said. You, Samuel? Samuel hesitated, then gave a short nod. Hart, Samuel Hart! Katena's grip was firm. One night. We leave with sun. Samuel searched his face, trying to find any hint of deceit. But all he saw was a man worn thin by battle and storm. Finally he nodded. One night, as Samuel turned to leave, Katena spoke again, his voice low but heavy. You alone. Long time. Samuel froze. He hadn't told them that. How did this man know? When he turned back, Katena was already walking away, his shadow swallowed by the flickering lantern light. That night Samuel lay in his bed but didn't sleep. Every creak of the wind, every groan of the storm, every muffled word from the barn kept him awake. He clutched his rifle tight, waiting for the moment the door would burst open. The moment steel would flash, but it never came. Instead, just before dawn, he heard something else, a scream, raw, guttural, filled with pain. He jumped from his bed, rifle in hand, and threw open the door. The barn was chaos. One of the Apaches writhed on the ground, clutching his chest. The others surrounded him, shouting in their tongue. Samuel froze. His eyes darted to Katena, who knelt beside the fallen man. When he looked up at Samuel, his face was grim. "Poison," Katena said. "Arrow wound. He die. Unless you help." Samuel's stomach dropped. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't even good at patching up his own cattle. But 10 desperate faces turned to him in that moment, eyes blazing, demanding an answer. And Samuel realized with a sinking heart. Whether he liked it or not, these men weren't just guests anymore. They were his responsibility. Samuel Hart had never felt so many eyes on him at once. The barn was thick with the smell of wet leather, sweat, and fear. The Apache warriors circled their fallen comrade, their painted faces twisted with desperation. The man on the ground thrashed, his chest heaving as if the life were clawing its way out of him. Katena's voice cut through the storm outside. "You save him," he said, his English clipped, heavy with demand. "Or we stay. Until he live. Or until all die." Samuel's grip on his rifle tightened. His instinct screamed to throw them off his land. He wasn't a healer. He wasn't a savior. He was just a tired, broken rancher trying to survive another lonely year. But Katena's eyes never wavered. Neither did the knives some of the warriors now clutched at their belts. Samuel swallowed. I don't know how," he muttered. Katena stepped closer, towering over him. His scarred face was unreadable, but his tone was like stone. "You try. You fail, we know you tried. You do nothing, we end you." The words hit harder than the thunder outside. Samuel looked down at the wounded man. The wound was ugly. An arrow had torn into his side, and the skin around it was swollen, purple, almost black. Samuel's gut turned. He knew infection when he saw it. Slowly, he lowered his rifle and set it against the stall. He knelt by the man, his hands trembling. "I'll need fire. Clean water. Whiskey, if you got it." The Apaches didn't move. They looked to Katena. With a single nod, 2 of them darted into the storm to fetch water from the well, while another unstrapped a flask from his belt and pressed it into Samuel's hand. Samuel took a long breath. He poured the whiskey over the wound. The man screamed, thrashing in the straw, but Samuel held him down. The liquid ran black with pus and blood. Samuel's heart pounded as he worked, digging into the wound with a knife heated red hot from the fire. The smell of burning flesh filled the barn. The warriors flinched but didn't move. Samuel worked like a man possessed, pulling splinters of the poisoned arrow free. Sweat poured down his face. He'd never done anything like this before, and every movement felt like a gamble between life and death. Finally, after what felt like hours, the wound was cleaned, cauterized, and bound in torn cloth. The man lay still, unconscious, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Samuel leaned back, his hands shaking, his shirt soaked with sweat. He wasn't sure if he'd saved the man, or just delayed the inevitable. The barn was silent except for the pounding rain. All eyes turned to Katena. The Apache chief studied Samuel for a long moment. Then with a slow nod he spoke. "You try. You fight for life. For that you live." The warriors murmured in agreement, the tension easing, but only slightly. Samuel felt their stares still burning into his skin, reminding him he was no friend. Just a tool, a man caught in a storm bigger than himself. The night dragged on. Samuel didn't sleep. He sat in the barn, rifle across his lap, watching the wounded man breathe. The warriors dozed in turns, some by their horses, others curled in the hay. Katena remained awake, sitting against a post, eyes never leaving Samuel. Finally, just before dawn, the storm broke. The rain slowed. The thunder rolled into silence, and the first gray light crept over the horizon. Katena rose, stretching his tall frame. He walked over to Samuel, who hadn't moved in hours. "You live alone." "Why?" Katena asked. Samuel stiffened. "Ain't your business." Katena's gaze hardened. "Everything is business out here. Every man's story touches another's." Samuel's jaw clenched. He wanted to stay silent, but something in Katena's eyes, something sharp, probing, as if he could see through every wall Samuel had built, broke his resistance. "My wife," Samuel muttered. "She died, fever, took her fast. Buried her on the ridge yonder. After that, nothing left but this land. And me?" Katena studied him for a long while, then gave a single nod. The land remembers. The dead walk with us, Samuel frowned. That's supposed to comfort me. Katina didn't answer. He simply turned, checking on his wounded man. By midday, the storm had passed. The Apaches prepared to leave, saddling their horses, tightening their gear. Samuel felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Maybe they'd ride off and he'd never see them again. But just as Katina mounted his horse, he looked back. "We come again," he said. "Not for shelter. For choice," Samuel frowned. "Choice? What choice?" Katina's dark eyes locked on him. "You will see soon." With that, the Apaches rode off, the thunder of their horses fading into the empty plains. For the first time in days, Samuel's ranch was silent again, but the silence felt different now, heavy like it was holding its breath. Samuel stood alone, by the barn, rifle in hand, staring at the horizon where they disappeared. He didn't know what Katina meant. He didn't know why fate had dragged him into their world, but deep down, Samuel Hart felt it. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Samuel Hart stared at the carving on his cabin door, the morning sun casting long shadows over the rough wood. The Apache war symbol was burned into his sight, a circle split with jagged lines, the mark of conflict. And under it, that single word in rough English letters. Soon, Samuel's breath caught in his throat. His ranch, his one place of solitude, had been marked like a battlefield. He reached out, running his fingers over the fresh grooves. They were sharp, cut by a steady hand. Someone had done this while he slept, while he thought he was guarding his land. Samuel stepped back, scanning the horizon. The plains stretched endless in every direction, the silence pressing against his ears. Not a rider in sight, but he knew they'd been here, watching, deciding. For the first time in years, Samuel felt like a stranger on his own land. The next days passed in restless silence. Samuel tried to return to his routines, mending fences, feeding what little cattle he had left, chopping wood for the coming winter. But nothing felt the same. Every creak of a branch, every flicker of shadow at the edge of his vision made him reach for his rifle. At night, sleep was shallow, broken by dreams of painted faces and burning symbols. He'd wake drenched in sweat, the echo of Katina's words rattling in his skull. "We come again, not for shelter. For choice, what choice? What did they want from a broken, lonely rancher like him?" 3 nights later, he had his answer. It was near midnight when he heard the horses. Not one, not 10, dozens. The sound rolled across the plains like thunder. Samuel leapt from his bed, rifle in hand, his heart pounding. He snuffed the lantern and crouched by the window. In the pale moonlight, shadows moved on the ridge. Riders, dozens of them, silent, steady, their silhouettes sharp against the silver sky. Samuel's throat went dry. Not 10 this time. At least 50, maybe more. And at their head rode Katina. The Apache chief raised his hand, and the riders halted like ghosts in the night. Samuel waited for the charge, for the arrows, for fire and blood to rain down on his little ranch. But none came. Instead, Katina rode forward alone, stopping just outside the barn. Samuel stepped onto the porch, rifle aimed. His voice cracked the silence. "You got nerve riding back here." Katina didn't flinch. His gaze was steady, his scar catching the moonlight. "We said we come, we said—" "Choice." Samuel's jaw tightened. "What choice?" Katina lifted a hand, signaling. From the riders behind him, 2 men dismounted. Between them, they dragged a prisoner, a young white man, his clothes torn, his face swollen from beatings. His hands were bound, his eyes wild with fear. Katina gestured toward him. "He kill our children. Burn camp, take food. We hunt him now." He fixed Samuel with a stare. "You judge. You choose." Samuel's stomach turned. The prisoner was no older than 20, his blonde hair matted with blood, his lips trembling. He fell to his knees in the dirt, looking up at Samuel with desperate eyes. "Please," the boy rasped. "Help me, they'll kill me." Samuel gripped his rifle tighter. His mind spun. Why him? Why drag a lonely rancher into this? Katina's voice was low but thunderous in its weight. "Your land, your law. You say live, or you say die. We honor." The Apaches behind him were silent, their faces unreadable in the moonlight. The boy's sobs cut through the air, sharp and pitiful. Samuel's chest heaved. He wasn't a judge. He wasn't a lawman. But here he was, standing between a vengeful Apache tribe and a terrified boy who might very well deserve death. Why me? Samuel finally muttered. Why bring him here? Katina's eyes narrowed. Because you alone. You nothing? Or you something? Tonight you decide. The weight of the moment crushed him. He looked at the boy, who begged with wide eyes, then at Katina, who stood like a stone carved from the earth. If Samuel spared the boy, would the Apaches see him as weak? Would they bring their wrath down on his ranch? But if he condemned the boy, he'd have blood on his hands. A decision he'd never wash away. Samuel's voice shook as he spoke. I don't, the boy screamed, thrashing in the dirt. Please, they'll kill me. I didn't do nothing. I swear. Katina cut him off with a sharp gesture. Silence fell again. Decide. Samuel's rifle lowered, his arms trembling. He had lived alone for years, haunted by silence, drowning in grief. But tonight silence had ended, and with it came a burden he never asked for. He took a breath, the words heavy in his chest. The air split with tension as the second wave of riders crested the ridge. Moonlight glinted off iron barrels, steel bayonets, and grim faces. Settlers, ranch hands. Farmers turned vigilantes, 50 of them, maybe more, moving like a tide of fire and iron. Samuel's blood ran cold. Between his barn and the open plain stood Katina and his Apaches, silent, their painted faces bathed in moonlight. Behind Katina, the prisoner knelt, trembling, his mouth gagged now to silence his desperate cries. The leader of the settlers rode forward, a broad man with a beard like rusted wire and eyes burning with fury. His voice thundered across the open land. Heart, he shouted. Step away from them devils. Samuel froze. He knew that voice. Daniel Crane, a rancher from the Southern Valley. Samuel hadn't seen him in years. You know what they are, Hart. Crane roared. Murderers, thieves. They killed women and children at Willow Creek. We tracked them here. He pointed a thick finger. Stand aside and we'll burn them out of your barn. Katina's voice cut like a blade. Lie. We protect Willow Creek. We fight men who kill for gold. His gaze flicked to Samuel. Now you see. Not all who ride under flag of white. Tell truth. The Apaches gripped their spears, bows, and rifles. The settlers raised their guns in return, and Samuel Hart stood between them. His heart thundered. He'd lived in silence for years, haunted only by ghosts. Now, with one step, one word, he could ignite war or stop it. Crane snarled. Hart, you give us that boy and step aside, or you'll die with them savages. Samuel looked at the boy, bound in the dirt. His face was pale, streaked with blood. But in his eyes, Samuel saw it. Fear, yes, but something else, guilt, truth. The boy wasn't innocent. Crane wasn't here for justice. This was vengeance. Greed dressed as law. Samuel raised his rifle, but not at the Apaches, not at the settlers. At the sky, he fired. The crack of gunpowder shattered the night. Silence fell like a blade. Enough. Samuel roared, his voice echoing across the plains. This is my land. My barn, my law. Both sides froze, eyes locked on him. Samuel stepped forward, his rifle steady now, his voice iron. I seen death. I buried it with my own hands. I won't bury more for men's lies. Not tonight, Crane spat. You gone soft, Hart. You think they'll spare you when they're done. You think you can trust them? Katina's face was carved from stone, his silence heavier than words. Samuel's gaze flicked between them, his soul trembling. He had nothing left to lose, but maybe, just maybe, he could give these men a choice better than slaughter. He turned to Katina. Take your wounded, leave, I'll deal with Crane. The Apache chief's eyes burned, weighing him. Finally, Katina nodded once. He barked a command and his warriors moved, lifting the prisoner and mounting their horses. Crane's rage boiled. You let them go, Hart, and you side with them. You sign your own death. Samuel leveled his rifle. Then come and take it, Crane. The settlers shifted, murmuring, unsure. Some raised rifles, but others hesitated, their eyes darting between Hart and the Apaches. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Katina raised his hand, with a cry that split the night. The Apaches wheeled their horses and thundered into the plains, vanishing into the darkness like shadows swallowed by the earth. Crane cursed, slamming his rifle stock into the dirt. He glared at Samuel, spittle flying. You'll regret this, Hart. They'll bleed you dry. And when they do, we'll come back and finish the job. The settlers began to retreat, muttering, their faces uneasy. Some spat at the dirt as they passed, but none fired a shot, and soon the ridge was empty. The night fell silent once more. Samuel lowered his rifle. His chest heaved. His ranch was still standing, but it no longer felt like his. Dawn broke slow, painting the plains in red and gold. Samuel sat on his porch, the war mark still carved deep into his door. His hands shook as he cleaned his rifle, his mind replaying every word, every face. He thought he was alone in the world. That silence was his only companion. But now, silence had been broken, and nothing would ever be the same. The crunch of hooves broke his thoughts. Samuel looked up. Katena rode alone this time, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the morning light. He stopped a few paces from the porch, his face unreadable. "You chose," Katena said. "Not them." "Not us, you," Samuel stood, gripping the porch rail. "And what does that mean for me?" Katena's eyes narrowed. "It means you are no longer alone. You stand between two worlds now, and both will test you." Samuel's throat tightened. "And if I fail?" The Apache chief leaned forward, his scar catching the sun. "Then both will bury you." With that, Katena wheeled his horse and rode into the horizon, leaving Samuel standing in the morning light. The war mark still burned into his door, and a storm still gathering on the wind.